All right. So thank you very much, everyone. It is just the top of the hour, and we have a lot going on today. Thank you very much for joining us. I know that there's about 25 more people who've RSVP'd, maybe a little bit early or a little bit late at night for them. I imagine they'll be coming in and out over the course of the next 2 hours. Very excited to have this may be our 10th action meeting in the past year or so. And this time, again, we are talking about a timely, very pressing, important issue for all of us. And this is the basic overview we'll be having. After my little introduction, I will be introducing our main speaker today. We will have 2 people who have a little time to respond and give short talks, and then they will have a roundtable discussion, and this will be facilitated. I'll introduce everyone in a few minutes. I want to wait till more people come in. There will be time for Q&A, and then we will have a little discussion on what are some possible actions we can take. We will go into breakout rooms. You will be able to choose which breakout room you go into. And we'll talk about specific actions, after which time we'll come back to the main room and share the specific actions we either have taken or will take. And again, we'll want to be able to take some photos throughout. Some simple guidelines for all of our meetings. Try to stay on mute, please. I may ask you to mute, or one of the other hosts may ask you to mute. Our helpers here today are Vice Chair Matt, our Secretary from Democrats Abroad Japan, Dave, and our Democrats Abroad Japan intern, Megan. They are here to help us out. They're here to make this event go smoothly. It doesn't happen without them. Thank you very much. And Matt will also be on the Facebook page watching for questions or comments there. All right. We may have at some point some type of bandwidth issue, so we may need to limit video to speakers during presentations. Do not hesitate to include questions in the chat. We might not take them right away, but we will take them later. Simple guidelines. This does happen sometimes with some of these issues. Trigger people get upset. I understand. I do want to help everyone understand, as I say at every meeting, no one here is a certified counselor, but if you need help, TEL is always available for you until tonight, until 2 a.m. Japan time, if you need to talk to someone about any of the issues that come up. And TEL is Tokyo English Lifeline, has been serving the English-speaking community in Japan for close to 40 years, providing mental health care. So we're going to formally get this started now that we have a few more people. I want to introduce Democrats Abroad Japan. Since not everyone is a member, as long as you're an overseas voter living in Japan, you can join Democrats Abroad Japan. We are the voice of American voters here in Japan. We make every citizen's voice heard by electing Democrats, trying to influence policy, and connecting with each other. Not always about issues, but sometimes socially. Democrats Abroad globally is part of the Democratic Committee. The Democratic National Committee aims to register all 9 million overseas citizens not residing in U.S. states or territories. We have about 180-some thousand members in 46 countries. Japan has 5 voting members, almost 6, in Democrats Abroad Global. All right. I want to just say 2 words about our action meetings before I start talking about why we're here. As I see people are popping in as expected at 11:05. We should have a full house by 11:15. We have a lot of events across the globe educating our members on issues, sharing information. The purpose of our action meetings do more than educate, but support members to go from ideas to action, to actually share specific and concrete things you can do to have an impact on issues. So these meetings, we started the action team about 10 years ago in Democrats Abroad, until we started the online version last year when our new administration came in. We used to have these monthly meetings where we took specific actions for 3 months, for example. We had a specific action to remove the nonprofit status of the NRA. That was an example of something we worked on for about 3 months. So why are we here today? We're here because a member raised the issue and said, you know, we need to do something about this. And Patrick, thank you very much for raising the issue. We know that there's a serious issue with gun violence in the US. That's not a question. We all know this. We know that the US is exceptional here. We know that we stand out. And why are we doing it today on Juneteenth? Well, there's a number of reasons for us to talk about why to do it now. It isn't just because there's been a rash of mass shootings. It's also because persons of color are more likely to be impacted by gun violence. The media does cover mass shootings more. They are more media worthy, but it doesn't make them more important. The recent media coverage has really helped bolster maybe the general public support for gun control, but it hasn't necessarily bolstered politicians' support for gun control in any major way, maybe a little slight way. So we know that people who support quote unquote gun freedoms have had an active long-term campaign and are very vocal. We need to be very vocal. We need to speak out and take part in this. So that's why we're having this event, because our voice matters. And voting once a year is important, but it's not enough. There's all the things that happen throughout the year, which we will hear about over the course of this event and this meeting. But I do want to remind people that it wasn't always this way. When I was young, so I'm quite old, there were no guards in schools. When I was younger, we didn't worry about gun violence. Even when I lived in a quite a dangerous neighborhood in New York in the 1980s, frankly, I was not worried about gun violence. I was worried about being robbed. Yes, my car got broken into, but I wasn't worried about gun violence the way people are in the US today. We didn't have gun safety drills or shooter safety drills in school. That thing did not exist. So there was a time that this didn't exist, and things have changed. And I do hope that people feel empowered, not just upset. We need to go beyond the angry and the upset feelings and actually see what policies we can impact and what we can do. And that's really why we are having this event. Our power, our voice. Of course, our vote matters, but it's more than voting once every 4 years or once a year. So now that we have a number of people here, this is awesome. We have half of our RSVPs are here. So I think we can actually move on to our main speakers. We're very excited to have Tremayne Edwards here. He was introduced to me by our member who initiated this event, Patrick Lovell. Tremayne is the Education and Engagement Director for the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. He's involved in community education, engagement, and advocacy activities related to and communities impacted by gun violence. You'll find out a little bit more about what he's doing and his work. And I'd like to hand it over to you, Tremayne. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very fortunate to have you this evening, your time.
Yes, and say good evening to you all from Seattle, Washington. Good morning to, I'm sure many of you, good afternoon. Thank you for the clap. I noticed that the only child in me appreciates it. No, I'm very happy to be here. As stated, I'm Tremayne Edwards. I work with and for the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. We serve the state of Washington. although we do help in other states with replication, most recently in the state right below us of Oregon. So we are able to kind of have that touch point across America in hopes that we can also show other states when there is inaction at the federal level, as we see often, states do have the power to keep their community safe. Washington is one of the top 10 leaders when it comes in terms of gun violence prevention. And so we hope to, right, and even in the conversations today, to believe, show people that you can still make change, right? And as was stated, I love to write a note, right? Our voice matters. Our organization proves that every day that our voices matter, because a lot of the work that we do cannot be accomplished without our grassroots efforts. So with our organization, we're ultimately, right, working every day to address the gun violence crisis that is happening in our communities and promoting gun responsibility. We live in a very nonpartisan space, middle ground that pushes that, right, with those rights should come responsibilities, and no exceptions there, because we know that gun violence is 100% preventable. And we do this work with the collaboration of experts, civic leaders, citizens, to find evidence-based solutions to this crisis that's happening in our communities. And we do that in a couple of different ways. Since this organization is about 10 years old, so this organization also started right out of the inaction of Sandy Hook, which kind of feels so unfortunate right now, as we've been extremely busy right now with Uvalde and looking 10 years later, and many of our supporters have kind of been reignited right now. You look 10 years later and some of the inaction that's happened at the federal level, but we've been happy to see what happens at our state level, such as, we've had, or they have had, I've been for just a year, they've had quite a success with various ballot initiatives around, raising the age of 18 to 21 when it comes to the purchase of semi-automatic rifles, with the creation and implementation of extreme risk protection orders, which are named ERPOs here. I'm from Virginia, so we call them red flag laws, same difference. As well as closing some background loopholes. So in our organization, we're three parts as well, right? We have a PAC, which I think in most things, all things America, it's the United States of America, we all know what the PAC is and what the PAC does, but endorsing GVP champions, as we like to call them, gun violence prevention champions, because we also do C4 work. There's a lot of advocacy and legislative advocacy. We believe in getting good life-saving legislation passed, and we can't do that, right, with people like yourselves voting and constantly being in communication with the legislative officials and electeds. But as much as those bills get passed, right, we also need to have good electeds in those places to make sure that those things are implemented, that we seek out for. And then we have a C3, which is all things my world. I would argue 80% of my life is the C3 world, where I get to go into many different communities. The last couple of weeks, I have done a lot of that, more than I probably have since I've been here, going to different rallies, going to various protests, supporting other areas across our state. I've done a lot of mailing out of our buttons and our pins and our bookmarks lately this month, and sending out information to different parts of the state for people to know that we are here, we are supportive of them, and any way that we can support their efforts, we will almost always do that to the best of our ability. But as was also mentioned, right, we can end gun violence, and to go beyond that, right, those emotions, sometimes that anger. And I love alliteration. I'm an English major by heart and a fine arts minor. So my alliterative self would say, turn that anger into advocacy. And so that's a big part of my conversation today, is to take all that and to turn it into advocacy. Right, we've mentioned a little bit at the beginning, right, we know that there is a problem in the United States of America. The states have a very uniquely American gun violence epidemic. I don't know if you all have seen it, and I can share it after with you as well, regarding Johns Hopkins report that came out a few months ago around all things 2020 and gun death statistics that they released and shared. And it's a 40-page document, and I certainly will not go for that 40-page document. But in some of those quick snapshots, right, there were 45,222 gun deaths in the US. Gun deaths increased from 2019 to 22 by 35%. The one for me that hurts the most, and I think we are also reeling from that right now, is even before Uvalde and this report was released, right, is in the United States of America now, gun violence is the leading cause of death among children teens, and young adults under the age of 25. We have now surpassed vehicles and various illnesses that, right, we arguably work every day to address, right? We talk about the second leading is cars, right? But every day in this country, we're continuously looking at ways to improve that and keep each other safe, right? When you look at illnesses that sometimes may afflict our bodies and take the lives of others, arguably putting lots of time, talent, and treasure into solving those. But why haven't we done that for firearms? And that, for me, having a background with youth, I have, before this, switching into this space, I work with youth a lot. So that one has hurt. And I think we're seeing it play out, unfortunately, right now with what's happening in our school system. It is now the leading cause of death. And at the end of the day, I think that for us, right, too, that takes away the thing that is unfortunately politics of it, and it's about people and our children. Our children deserve fun. They deserve access to learning and fun. They don't deserve access to trauma. And that is currently what we are doing to our children and those families. I went to an event just yesterday and unnamed community in our state, and it was around Father's Day. And it was for children who have lost their fathers, for fathers who were there who have lost their children. And to sit in that moment and to hear their stories, right? But also the resolve and still being committed to fighting in this efforts to keep other families safe, and so that they don't have those same stories was important. And so often, right, when I'm having these conversations with people as well, right, it sometimes can be easy to feel like you can't do enough, or that things aren't changing and things aren't happening. And I encourage people to continue to fight and to do that into many ways, because we can't accept the status quo. We know that things can change. Why? And people usually, when they say that, or they feel that, I love to push towards our organization and the work that we've done in this state, right? Those 3 ballot initiatives got passed, happened with everyday people in our communities and grassroots advocacy, right? We've gone through the legislative process in this state. Granted, I wasn't here prior, but they've done great work. They've done over 30 bills that have been passed in this state. We're one of the top 10 in the country. The other Washington, we often say the tales of 2 Washingtons, Washington State and Washington, D.C., often sometimes looks at the work that we are doing and have come over and examined the things that are happening over here and how we can bring that to the federal level. And if it's not happening at the federal level, right, we know that it can happen at the state level, and we can help in other states. And so I also, in these conversations, like to place ways in which that can happen, and why it's important to happen, because something that I often say is, unfortunately, with gun violence in this country, it taps every space in our country, right? When you look at it in terms of now it being a leading cause of death for our children, the traumatic experiences that we are now exposing our youth to and what that does to them. So we have a public health crisis happening here, and what we are doing, what we are allowing, to happen to our children and our families and our communities, right? Gun violence cost $280 some billion on average a year, right? Think of, if we address this public health crisis in our country, the money that is going towards now gun violence in this country, right? What could be used of that money in this country to reviving communities, to reviving our healthcare system, to getting people the adequate funding that they need for their community-based programs, for good living, waging jobs, all the things that we know would help in a thriving community, because we also know, right, statistically, it's shown that communities that are affected by system inequities and economic inequities also have a higher rate of gun violence in their communities. So we tackle this as the public health crisis as it is, right? We don't have to put that money there. Think of all the places that it can go. So it taps us economically as well. Another point, right, to adding to that the public health crisis and the mental health pieces, right, as we talked about mass shootings in this country and how the intense media coverage comes with those. We most certainly don't want to minimize those, right? But it's like 1% of the shootings. Over 60% of the shootings that happen in this country are suicide. People taking their own lives with a firearm, right? And the presence of a gun in the home increases the risk of suicide threefold. So we've got issues there as well in terms of how we are giving our people in this country proper access to healthcare to take care of themselves. I could go on and on about all the different ways that this taps into our country, but I also want to tap into the ways in which we can stop it, because our organization has proved in this state that it is preventable, right? Many of the things that are now slated for the first, in 30 years, we've had a conversation around gun safety bills in our federal level, are things that we have already addressed in the state of Washington. So we know that it works over here in this Washington. We're hoping it'll be the starting point, the foundation of Washington, because this most certainly is not the end all be all that we want to see, right? But I often tell people, right, turn that anger into advocacy. While we might have many problems that are faced before us, we most certainly got many possibilities to do it. As you'll see, I slid my level of alliteration in there yet again, right? But there's many ways that we can act, and we often kind of talk about a 5-step process, if you will, many ways that you can be involved and take action in your communities to providing for safer communities. And one of those, right, is something that we're doing right here today together as a community, which is learn. Showing up and learning what is happening in your communities, showing up and learning how you can support your communities, showing up and learning how you can influence those in power to show up for the communities that they have been elected to protect and to serve. Good morning, I saw your comment. So learning, it's really important, right? That is my title, Everyday Education and Engagement. My hope is through public education, right? Whether it's this, whether it's the summits that we host, whether it's going to conferences, is sharing just simply the information, and then outside of that, right, show people the solutions that we can all be a part of. So learning is one thing we always encourage, right? After learning, the next one slides right into itself, which is sharing. Once you've learned something, share what you've learned to others, right? Something that we often do in our conferences is myth busting, right? Because sometimes people have preconceived notions around certain things when it comes to gun violence in this country. And so we often, once we have had people learn, we encourage them to share that information, to share it with others, to dispel the myths that are happening out there. We're hoping to do a soon around mental health and gun violence, and to end some of the harmful stigmas that sometimes come around mass shooters and the conversations around mental illness and how that creates a stigma for those who are living with mental illnesses. So learn and then share what you learn, right? I'm horrible at phrases, but I think the phrase is, you give a man a fish, feed him for a day, but you teach him, et cetera, et cetera. I really am bad at phrases, right? But the hope is that you learn something and then you share it to help others in your community. Outside of that is ACT, which right now we are seeing even ourselves. People are acting more than they have for a while now, but that acting can look many different ways, right? We live in a very busy society. People have many things to do, and acting can be many different ways. Is volunteering with your organization, showing up and tabling at events, writing your electeds, calling into their office, sharing information so that others know what they are capable of doing, making sure that people are registered to vote, simply texting 5 to 10 friends and making sure that they have a plan to vote. There are many ways to act. I often tell our volunteers, I have a plethora of ways that you can get in where you like to fit in. If it's just clicking the link that helps you get to all your electeds and send them an email, or if you want to be here every week showing up to a volunteer event with me, but ultimately acting, because when we all act together and we organize together, change happens in our communities. And then after that, so you've learned, you're sharing, you're acting. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say vote. Your vote is your voice, and it is important to do it. And someone who is getting ready to go into GOTV, which stands for Get Out the Vote. Send all the nice thoughts and prayers to me as I go into midterm season, right? But it's important for people to vote. We go out and we work with our volunteers, and we go out into communities to make sure that people are ready to vote, that they're registered to vote, right? We endorse candidates. Have they made a plan to vote? Do they need help looking at different candidates? We present them simply with the facts, and they can make informed decisions from there. But it's important that people vote, and not only in the elections, right? But we also do legislative session, and we love for people to be involved in those processes as well, of those who they have now voted for, to make sure that those people vote for the bills that we need to keep our community safe. But at the end of the day, vote early, vote often, vote at every single thing. If you get tired, take a nap, wake back up and vote again at the next thing. Always vote, it is important, and to encourage others to vote as well. And then lastly, because I grew up in the South, I'm a Southern Baptist, I try not to do that thing where we talk for 10 years because I could do it, is donate, right? And especially in the C3 world, time, talent, and treasure, making sure that organizations out there who are doing the work 9 to 5, right, have the support that they need to also do this work in the community, right? Especially in the behind the scenes work that is often happening, right? There's all these things are different ways that you can tap in, right? But when you're acting, right, it can easily fall under that umbrella as well of ACT, right? You can also donate to organizations that are doing this work, right? Donating to organizations that are community-based organizations that are direct services, right? We are not a direct service provider, but we support those that are doing that work. We also go and lobby and advocate that those organizations have the resources that they need, like the event that I went to last night, right? We helped sponsor them however we could to make sure that those events happen, because they are working with a very specific base in their community that needs that attention, that needs that focus, that needs that support. So of course, always showing up and acting, but that acting can look many different ways. And one of those is most certainly always giving to organizations to make sure that they are supported. I think I felt pretty good within my time limit. I try not to be a Southern Baptist because it's to my core. I wrote my notes this time. If I didn't write my notes, it would have gone another 13 minutes.
Thank you so much, Tremayne. Thank you. And I'm sure people are going to have a lot to talk with you about in a few minutes. That was awesome. I really appreciate, I want to say so many things to what you have to say, and I'm not Southern Baptist. I could say 100 more things. Thank you so much. That was really awesome. I want to, before we have Q&A time, we have a few more speakers. So I'd like everyone to just hold on a few more minutes. Sorry, this might not be so clear. Multiple things going on here. We're going to have a little bit of time to hear from our event initiator, Patrick, and then another speaker, Michael Scala, a New York attorney, who's going to talk a little bit about a proposal he has up. And the next section is going to be moderated by Jay Carter. Maybe some of you also know him by his other names and his other work, but you may know him as the chair of Black Lives Matter Tokyo. And he's going to and moderate a little discussion between our different speakers over the next, say, 10 to 20 minutes. And I would like to hand it over first to Patrick, and then to Mike, and then to Jay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really heartened that there are so many people who've taken the time out of their evenings and afternoons and weekends to show their concern about an issue that, as Tremayne has said, is an epidemic. I'm no expert on guns, and I'm no expert on the situation in the US, but it has, like with many people, it has touched my life personally. Last year in August, my cousin's son, who has had some mental problems and issues over anger, took a shotgun that he had access to, shot his neighbor to death and set his house on fire, then went to his parents' house and shot my cousin and his wife to death and set their house on fire, and then went on a rampage through Kennewick in Washington, southeast Washington state, and shot up the town, set 2 fires in the electrical workers union hall, and then set his truck on fire and killed himself. And these are the kind of senseless gun violence things that capture the media's attention, because what's better for the evening news than a pickup truck on fire on Main Street in Kennewick, Washington? But as Tremayne has said and pointed out, the real violence and the real harm with guns is happening every day. Every minute of every day in the United States, a child either discharges a gun, shoots him or herself, or shoots somebody in the room with them. And these stories almost never make it on the evening news. And the CDC, which until very recently was barred by law, by the Dickey Amendment of 1996, barred by law from covering incidences of gun violence. So it's no mystery that most Americans are pretty much in the dark when it comes to the really sickening and serious degree of gun violence in the nation. This Dickey Amendment was followed by the Protection of Lawful Commerce to Arms Act in 2005, which these were both highly pushed and financed by the NRA, which prevented any gun manufacturer from being held financially liable for the actions that their products were used in. In other words, it's sort of like if another company had protection to put any product on the market that they like, let's say the tobacco industry, if they had the ability to sell tobacco products that when it became very clear that these products were not only injuring, but killing people, but were not held to any liability in the courts. Well, it's ridiculous. But yet these laws are still on the books, although the PLCAA law has now been modified, and the CDA is not only starting to compile data, but also to fund research into gun violence. The problem with all of that is it takes time. And that brings up my second point, which is related to my age. I'm 72. I've been away from the United States for roughly 50 years. And every time I've gone back to the US, which has been increments of 5 and 6 years over the last 50 years, I've seen the increase of gun availability and violence. And unlike Americans who are seeing this every day, and they see it every day to the point where it just becomes common. It's like, well, this is the way it is. Well, for people like me, I can see that it is not the way it always has been. This has been an incremental increase over the last 50 years. And it used to be funded and propagated by ALEC and the NRA. But today, the NRA is almost insignificant and almost not so worthy of our attention, because the GOP has incorporated the NRA. The NRA is today the GOP, and the policies that the GOP is pushing are all the policies that the NRA spent all of that money in pushing on the nation. ALEC, of course, is responsible for laws like open carry and stand your ground and et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, this took time to happen. And it's time for the majority who are not gun owners, but who are held hostage to this violence, it's time for them to become informed, as Tremayne says, and to begin to organize and bring some sanity back. And I've been told many times by many people, I'm a tour guide in Japan, and so I meet a lot of Americans who come to Japan. I'm told all the time, oh, it'll never go back. You can never change it. Just like solar power, oh, forget about it. It'll never happen. Electric cars, oh, it'll never happen. Well, these things can happen, but they take individual action, and they take, like Tremayne's 5 steps, sharing, acting, and voting. And we can bring sanity back. I just don't accept the situation, and it's getting worse. You know, the last major gun violence in, where was it, Uvalde, we've had over 22 gun incidences where more than 4 or 5 people were murdered in churches, shopping malls, on the streets, in stores. You know, this is insanity. And so that's why I am here, and that's why I was on Sarajean's back to see if we could do something about this. And it's small, we're a small group here, but if we multiply each one of us by 5 or 10, then it starts to become bigger. And our voices, of the voice of sanity, can begin to be heard. And so I thank you, and back to you, Sarajean.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much for sharing that personal story, and just, I think, something that is so much easier for people who live overseas to see the big change. And maybe that can energize us more to do more. Thank you. I'd like to pass it on to Mike. I don't want to talk too much, so I'll just pass it right over to Mike, who's going to talk with us a little bit about what he's been working on, and maybe that can inspire us as well to take a next step. Thank you. And I will mute myself.
Thank you, Sarajean. Thank you, Tremayne, Patrick, and everyone for joining us. I'm Mike Scala. I'm an attorney here in New York, and I serve on the Queens County Democratic Committee. I'm also a former Democratic nominee for the City Council in my borough of Queens. In addition to that, I've worked in government as counsel and legislative director in the state Senate. And so I've seen firsthand how these bills become laws or sometimes don't. Sandy Hook was mentioned earlier. I remember in 2012, when Sandy Hook happened, I wrote an op-ed in my local paper about some of the things I thought we needed to address when it came to gun regulation. And 10 years later, here we are. I can go back and open up that same op-ed, and the points still stand. So while a lot has changed when it comes to gun violence in the US, it seems like not so much has changed when it comes to the laws. Yes, there has been some progress, and sometimes we take 2 steps forward and 4 steps back. That's the way it goes sometimes. All the things we mentioned before are going to be so important when it comes to voting, when it comes to doing more than that, when it comes to being advocates in our communities, putting pressure on the elected officials to be responsive to our needs. You know, we always hear T's and P's after an incident, thoughts and prayers, right? And it's getting sickening because we feel like there's not action on this. And I think it's worth mentioning that it's not all about guns, right? Of course, mental health is important. The economy is important too. And a lot of the violence that we see is tied to economic trends. So we have to take a holistic approach and come at this from all angles. With that being said, we do have to be able to do something about the guns. And I think it's pretty disgusting that we live in a country where we can't seem to make real substantial progress on the issue. Now, as I said, I come from New York. If I can achieve one thing in my time in public service, is to eradicate this myth. And quite frankly, it's a talking point propagated by the NRA and now the GOP and others. But I want to eradicate this myth that's out there, even in New York, that gun regulation and gun laws only affect the law-abiding. People say this all the time. And New York should really tell you that that's not the case, because in New York, we do have very strong gun laws, but we are also seeing gun violence because there are crimes taking place with guns that are illegally obtained from other places and brought into New York across state lines. Now, this is a real issue, and the way to get to it isn't just to put pressure on the politicians, because the politicians respond to the people. The people need to change the narrative around this. And one of the ways we can do this is by this idea that I've had, where I want to see more transparency around gun laws and about crimes. And we have data already that shows that in New York, for example, the guns are not native New Yorkers, as I say, that they come from other states. But it's not personal enough to people, because people still repeat the talking point, well, laws only affect the law-abiding, and if, it's going to make it harder for the rest of us. So despite the fact, the data that we have showing that the guns, no offense to Tremayne, a lot of them come from Virginia, a lot of them come from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania. You can look at the trends. They're originating from states with lax gun laws, and they're being brought here. People know this, I guess, at a high level, but it's not personal enough. And so what I really want to do is have this transparency where I think people should have a right to go online and see where the gun used in a crime is coming from, because we're under attack. We're not only under attack by gun violence, we're under attack in the courts. We talked about, a lot of people talk about the Supreme Court decision that's threatening to overturn Roe v. Wade. As horrible as that is, there's another one now coming out, or potentially coming out, that's stands to undo New York's open carry law. And New York, by the way, doesn't have a very strong open carry. It's very hard to get a permit to carry in open in New York, and rightfully so. The Supreme Court might strike that down, and we don't know what they're going to do, what reasoning they're going to take yet, how they're going to validate that. If they do, they might say just the way that the law was written was too strict, or maybe it gives too much authority to the local officials. However they write it down, the state is going to have to come back and pass another law to overcome that. But we need to be vigilant at the state level and continue to fight these measures. And so my proposal that I'm pushing is just one of them, but I think this should be low-hanging fruit, is when you go online now, you should be able to see that gun that was used to kill your neighbor, or God forbid, your family member. Where did it come from? Because people talk about, again, guns don't kill people, it's the people, or like the gun laws don't matter. Okay, if you can see that gun was brought in from a state with a lax law, I think that will do a lot to eradicate this idea that the gun laws don't matter. It's a federal issue because people bring these guns across state lines, but I think this is something that can be done at the state level. Every state can pass this. At least states, you would hope, with democratic control, should be able to get something like this done. It doesn't take money, right? It's negligible in terms of the funding. It's simply a transparency bill to show people where the guns are coming from. If we can get that done, I think, and measures like that, that should be able to move the conversation a little bit and show people that the gun laws really do matter. And maybe we can, as was mentioned, have some more sanity back to the conversation. Because what we're seeing across the country, not just on this issue, but on many issues now, people have two sets of facts that they're dealing with. And so it's one thing to debate the laws, but if you can't even agree on the facts, you're not going to get anywhere. So hopefully, with more transparency around the board, we can have more accountability, and then we can have more of a sensible discussion about some of these laws. So that's my proposal. I'm happy to talk about that later in the breakout room and take any questions people have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm really moved by thinking about what we can really do. That's so important for us to focus on right now. For the next 30 minutes, I'd like to hand the moderated discussion over to our chair from Black Lives Matter, Jaylon Carter, and welcome Patrick, Tremayne, and Mike to join in the discussion, and other people to put some questions in the chat, which our hosts and moderators will review. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarajean. And welcome, everybody. Glad you guys had me. I'm from Black Lives Matter Tokyo. You can see us on Instagram and Twitter, Black Lives Matter Tokyo, or BLM Tokyo JP. So contact us there. So I've got a couple of questions here, and of course we're taking questions from the audience as well. So the first one here is, we're talking about shootings, and that we know this is a very big issue. Gun violence and shootings are an ongoing issue in the US. We know recently there was the mass shooting in Buffalo and the Uvalde, Texas elementary school shooting. They were major news. But even just yesterday, there was a mass shooting in an Alabama church where 2 people were killed and 1 was injured. So, of course, now we've got some discussion going on in regards to gun legislation.
Sorry, Jay, I just want to ask Miriam to please stop sharing your screen. Thank you.
All right. Well, while that's being rectified, let's get to the first question here. So there's gun legislation negotiations that are happening in Congress, and just yesterday, the lead Republican negotiator walked out of the hearings. So to the panel here, what can people do when the lead parties can't or won't come to an agreement or even talk in good faith?
At some point, you have to vote. I mean, and it's disheartening to say that because we want to be able to hold our officials accountable because they're, in theory, elected to serve us. But when they stop, there's really nothing we could do at a certain point but organize to vote them out. If they're not going to negotiate in good faith, we need to replace them with people who will.
I would just like to add that I'm a famous letter writer to my representatives, and I get really frustrated when I get the form letters back. And in the state of Washington, for example, Senator Kaiser, Tremayne, I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation, but you would know, who is the 33rd District representative in the Washington State Senate. I always get the same watered down letter back, which says, I protect the Second Amendment rights, but I also want to do what I can to help prevent gun violence. Well, the two just simply don't go together. And another note that I just wanted to make is everybody here seems to be pretty comfortable with using the term gun violence and gun violence prevention. And that's good and that's important. But I think we need to note that for most Americans, they hear gun control. And so it's a term that I think we need to, Tremayne has made this point over and over again in the past in my communications with him, but we shouldn't use that term. It's got bad negative connotations to the people who believe that the Second Amendment has no restrictions to. But letter writing, I think, is really important. But Mike, how do you get by the form letter level with representatives?
Right. Well, I guess it goes back to my point about if they're not being responsive at a certain point, all you can do is organize to try to vote them out. Easier said than done, especially if you live in, let's say it's a district that's all Republican or all Democratic, whatever the case may be. Sometimes it's hard to win a general election of the opposing party, but you could try to get them in a primary or, if that's not going to be possible, I mean, I would say still try to do that if they're not responding to your needs. While they're in office, there are things you can try to do, like organize more people to speak up. One letter is one thing, and it's great that you write it, and you should keep writing them. But what if there was an organizational effort to have 100 letters, 1,000 letters sent? They might start to be a little bit more responsive to efforts like that. Ultimately, unfortunately, the people in office respond to political capital, which means a lot of times it's in the form of money from these special interests, but it's also in the form of organizational efforts of vote.
I think that sounds like something where an organization like Tremayne's comes into play, that organizes around an issue and motivates people to get moving as well.
I literally was going to say that. I was like, and that's who we come in. Even when you don't see us, we're in the background. I guess betwixt both those things is, right, the power of organizing and still advocating and reaching out to your electeds. But at some point, if they aren't responding, right, then part two is to organize for the next candidate. And right, even here's the thing, I think at this point after the 2020 election, where even I just threw out Georgia, I was like, that's never going to happen. Let's let that one go. And then Georgia threw me for a curve. I was also playing a game with friends. We were trying to mark what we think would happen. And they threw me for a loophole. It goes to show that organizing works in many different areas of all the different spaces. It might not happen overnight, even if you want it to happen overnight, but organizing works and having those conversations, right, in our space, and especially with this one, right, the language and the words also matter because, right, we, again, are a space of gun responsibility and gun violence prevention. Everybody can agree at the end of the day to safety. Now, how we go about that may always be the place of contingency, but being able to organize and find that common ground with people and never giving up is important. And that advocacy, because I mean, at this point, Georgia threw me for a loop. It can happen anywhere.
On that, there were two things that you mentioned, and there's one that Patrick said, and one that you mentioned I wanted to bring up as a question. You said is everyone can agree on safety, and I have to ask because, like you said, it may be how that takes place. So when a lot of people are talking safety, we're talking about gun control measures and background checks, et cetera. But there are others on like the Republicans, like Ted Cruz, who think that looks like armed guards at an elementary school with teachers with armed weapons. So how do we resolve that?
I guess for me, and sometimes in those spaces is being able to, we live in a world of our organization, statistics and facts, and being able to, hear that concern. I think something that I often try to do, especially with people who might disagree with the work that we do or how we go about it, is still trying to empathize with what they're feeling, which ultimately is still fear, right? I hear at the end of the day, right, I hear that they have fear for their children at school. Yes, and our teachers have enough on their plate. The last thing we need to do is to arm our teachers when they are already sometimes parents to these students, and they're counselors to these students, and there's so many other things, and there's so many other avenues. And we just try to reimagine what that can look like. Sometimes in those conversations is trying to empathize on what I'm hearing and gathering. I hear what you're saying in terms of arming X, Y, and Z in school. All that to me is you're fearful, and that's fair, and that's fine. We are all fearful, but we also need to look at, that's one more thing that teachers got to do. If we do one exit in and one exit out, I hear you trying to come and meet me at the table, but like also let's look at emergency exits. Are we also going to have all of our children run out of one space if the building's on fire, right? Having those conversations that are also, I hear that, but let me also give you another part of that also presents a problem. So often in those conversations, I just try my best to navigate that with, I hear that, yes, but here's also the issue with that.
Right.
We'll go back to two things that Patrick mentioned, which is related to the same point, but it's really about messaging. And he mentioned gun control is bad messaging. I think that Republicans, unfortunately, are often better at messaging than Democrats. And we need to really pick it up when it comes to how we talk about these issues. Common sense gun regulation, I think, makes sense. Yes, you talk about gun control, you scare people, you think that means that everyone's going to come and take the guns away, everyone's guns away. And so messaging does play a role. The Second Amendment was also invoked, and I think this goes to messaging as well. The text of the Second Amendment talks about a well-regulated militia. And of course, the Supreme Court said that everyone's part of a militia, I guess, because they said it's personal gun right we all have. So the words well-regulated are in there. So if you're pro-Second Amendment, if you're pro-guns and pro-Constitution, you should support common sense gun regulations, right in the text of the amendment. I think this has to be part of our messaging, and we need to really get away from this idea that Democrats are anti-Constitution, constitutional rights, anti-Second Amendment. No, to be pro-Second Amendment means to have a well-regulated populace.
Right, well-regulated is a very key point there. It sounds like, because when something is well-regulated, there are going to be some restrictions, there are going to be some rules that people have to follow. Now, you brought the Second Amendment, and that was also one of Patrick's points, and that's the big thing that that gets pushed back. Like, we have the Second Amendment, of course, we have the right to have these guns. And a lot of people from other countries don't understand our love affair with guns. I mean, we're a country born out of frontier life. So this was, part of our culture. It came into it. So how do we get over this idea that, Democrats or anyone advocating for control is trying to take away from all guns while also maintaining the rights of the Second Amendment? Is it all or nothing? Can we do it? Or is it like Australia, where we have to take it all away?
Well, if I could jump in, I do have a reaction to that, but I do want to say first to Mike that I really respect the proposals put on the table, especially to transparency. It's really crucial. But the Second Amendment has probably been the most gas-lit piece of the Bill of Rights in the last 100 years, in that it is not, does have limits. And I think our messaging on this has been very inferior to so-called gun rights groups. I don't want to say GOP because I come from a family of Democrats, and many of them are gun owners, and they vote Democrat, but they love their guns. And so it isn't entirely a GOP issue. But I think, in the frontier days, when people had guns, they were single shot or revolver type weapons that were mostly used to kill Indians or buffaloes or to shoot game to put food on the table. But a lot's happened since that time. And the people who could benefit from game to have food on the table live in cities mostly and don't have the opportunity of shooting game. And the people who live in the countryside who have that opportunity, they're not putting game on the table. They're going to the supermarket like everyone else. And so I think there's a disconnect between the 18th century and the 21st century. And that's, I think, borders on willful ignorance. But I do have something that I would like to throw out, and I've only seen mentioned a couple of times. And that is that all of this messaging and choosing the correct words and trying to sit at the table with gun rights people, and to me, that would be like sitting at the other side of the table from Ted Cruz. These people are not going to change their mind. They are not, I think they're just bloody crazy. But anyway, I think we need to focus on things that really could bring change. And I'd like to throw out two. One, get rid of the filibuster and really make a big effort to get rid of the filibuster, because most common sense gun violence prevention regulation on the federal level requires a supermajority. And that ain't gonna happen with the filibuster. The second one is eliminate the Electoral College, which gives so much power to the minority. Minority and minority protection is important, but it's not, it's unbalanced right now. And anyone who follows the US Senate and what the US Senate, how their representation is, knows this to be true. And stop talking to these people, because they're never gonna come to a common sense point of view. Let's just get rid of the filibuster, elect people who have the voice of the majority, and pass gun violence prevention laws.
Right. No, that's much easier said than done, of course. And definitely going to have some sort of bipartisan negotiation in the way that our government is set up. And I know you mentioned that that these people are not going to relent. Now that brings me to back in the Clinton administration, we did have a ban on assault weapons, and that lasted for a number of years until the Bush presidency, where it lapsed and it wasn't renewed. So what changed then versus now that we can't make this kind of ban happen again?
Well, I would throw out the non-policy policy of the GOP, led by Majority Leader McConnell, who has made it a policy over the last 15 to 18 years that no cooperation with any Democratic administration will be given. And well, that's pretty, well, how many times has he said that? You know, it's time for us to start believing it. But regarding the Electoral College, there is, on a state level, I think there's something like 15 or 20 states have already mandated that their electoral votes will go to the majority winner in that state. And so we don't need a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Electoral College. We just need 25 more states to pass legislation that the majority of votes will take the electoral votes.
Yeah, can I clarify that point?
Please do.
You would need a constitutional amendment to outright abolish the Electoral College, but what Patrick is talking about is something called, I think it's called the Interstate Compact, where at the state level, states are vowing to award their electoral votes in the Electoral College process to the winner of the national popular vote, not just in their state, but the national, which would have the effect of undoing the Electoral College. And you wouldn't need every state to pass it. You would just need enough to represent a majority of the electoral votes in the country. So that is something that is doable, and it's doable at the state level. And so while Patrick expressed a lot of cynicism about working with the other side, I agree with his ideas, ending the filibuster, ending the Electoral College. Again, as Jay pointed out, easier said than done. In the meantime, I think there are a lot of things we can push for at the state level to bypass this and to try to get as much done as we can. If we have a blue state, there's really no excuse, right? If the legislature is Democratic, if the governor is Democratic, why are we not getting some of these things done, which would really have a major effect on what happens nationwide?
And that was coming to my next question in regards to the state level. So this issue nationwide is a massive issue that's going to take action at the higher levels of government, and you've got the two parties that are going to be fighting it out with each other. But that leaves the states. Can states implement their own stricter gun measures and bans and rules and regulations?
Absolutely. And I would say Washington proves that consistently, whether it's been through ballot initiatives where we've gotten, I wasn't here yet, they have gotten the people to do that. Washington is also overwhelmingly 60% of people support safer gun laws, such as this past legislative session. We got high capacity magazine restrictions passed, something that really to the very end didn't know how that was going to go. And thankful to all the people who helped advocate there. Right, but we've extended protections around school grounds and election offices and school board meetings and closing loopholes of ghost guns. And this is with me without my notes, but there's quite a few different things that we have proven at the state level that if inaction, right, again, for us, it's the tales of two Washingtons. The inaction that happens on the Washington on the East Coast side, we can take our own actions on the Washington state side. So most certainly, can happen. And that's why we want to, we try to help with replication of other areas to say, hey, listen, we're not going to sit here and wait on inaction. That's what birthed this organization, was the inaction. Your states can also be a part of this and working together, whether it's a ballot initiative, whether it's going through the legislature, which also involves also making sure that GVP champions are in elected offices to help get those things across the finish line.
And we need as many states as possible to do it, because as I mentioned before, in New York, we do have strict laws, but what good are they if you can go right across the border to Pennsylvania where they don't have strict laws and driving right back to New York? Doesn't really help. So we need Pennsylvania now to change its laws. We need other states to do it as well, as many states as possible. Otherwise, it's not going to make a difference.
Right. And something the state level is something that's more accessible to the hands of the people to make some kind of change happen. So making some kind of change happen nationwide, like again, it's a massive undertaking. And so people can feel a little bit like they're disempowered in making any that type of move or change happen. Is there anything that they could do at the local level?
Yes, absolutely. And New York City Council has done that. You have very strict gun laws in New York City, as an example, much stricter than in the rest of the state. So yes, locally, but also you find at the city level and local level, different programs like gun buybacks or different initiatives to try to get more guns off the street. And I think it's very important. All politics is local. Too often we focus too much at the national level and not enough at building and organizing from the ground up.
Right. And yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, because we want to make sure that people feel like they can do something, right? Going to vote every time there's an election, that's one thing to do, but the other 364 days of the year, it's like, what can you do? I mean, there's actions, like you said, at the local level. I would imagine groups like Tremayne's organization are doing actions year round as well.
Oh yeah, we send people probably an email once a week. But I will say something that I've also learned, right? Me coming into the space was new, but I came into it because of I've had 3 different interactions, whether directly or through family, who have been impacted by guns and gun violence. So that's why I came into the space. I had been working in a completely different field, but one thing I learned this year as well, outside of voting and going through the legislative process, is that the electeds that are also there, they love to hear from their constituents, and they need to hear from their constituents often to make to make it across the finish line, to look at those bills, or we're coming at the legislative session or whatnot. They need to hear, even if they vote your way normally, right? That doesn't still mean to sit out of it. They still need to also hear you, because they're constituents of those who are for them and those who are against them. And so I would add to that, this is one thing that I've learned, and all of this thing is, even at that state level too, is that they need to hear from you often, so that they also know that they have that support to finish strong.
Now,
excuse me, but I would just add to that it's a case of following the money, because with the world that we live in, with Citizens United, where companies are sometimes almost more important than the actual citizens in the country. Money is, well, that's another thing. If we can get money out of the system, that would be really great. But until we can, these politicians need to be, well, where their money comes from needs to be closely monitored, and more transparency needs to be around that.
Right. Yeah, and definitely, I think the money and the support, that also speaks to politicians, because their campaigns run on money. Their campaigns run on support.
Right. And a lot of people don't realize the importance of that. Like, you could look at a district that, let's say it's a little bit more moderate, but let's say, an extremist suddenly wins a primary, and you think, well, how did that happen? How do the voters who don't believe in these extreme views vote for the extreme candidate? It's most likely not that the voters agreed necessarily with the message or the platform of that politician. It's because they were able to get these groups that provided them money and resources. So maybe it's a union, or it could be a special interest group. It could be something like the NRA or their arm that came in and gave them money as a result of them taking these extreme positions, that then gave them resources that the other candidates, who might have been more in line with the electorate, just didn't have. And resources, which is money, it's also volunteers and people on the ground, win campaigns. And so to combat that, you do need people in the district and the state, whatever it is that we're looking at, to constantly put pressure on the officials and say, this is what we stand for. And it can't be just a scattered effort. You really need to organize this. You need community organizing to do this, to make sure that the officials are constantly hearing from the people who do vote for them about what their needs are, and they're not being influenced solely by the outside money and resources that come in.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to take I got 2 more questions here, I think, before we're about to come up on time here. I just wanted to talk about the mentality of the country. Like, we talk about, Second Amendment, and we have the right to bear arms. When I was young, the idea of having a hunting rifle was a non-issue, even in, previously, before that, even in TV shows way before that, in the 50s, giving a teen boy a hunting rifle was seen as something normal. So has our society devolved into a mentality and a responsibility level to where we're just not trustworthy enough to handle that responsibility like before? Have we gotten immature?
Well, I just have one comment about that, and that is what you say is so, but 50 years ago, when you were a kid, my father was liked to hunt, and he wanted to take me hunting, and he gave me a gun and all of that stuff. And I don't know, for whatever reason, good, bad, or whatever, I didn't want to have anything to do with the gun as a kid, and I've never wanted to have anything to do with guns since. But I did, because I was a good boy. I went to gun safety classes, which everybody had to do. You know, one thing that treating guns in this society today should be like driving a car. You don't just give the keys to your kid and say, okay, go out and have a good time. They don't have a license. They don't have insurance. They've never gone to driving school. Are you crazy if you would do that? Well, that's the way we treat guns. When a kid turns 18, they get a gun. Well, one of the things that needs to be done is treating guns in the bare minimum thing is to treat guns like any other privilege, where they are qualified to have it and have gone through some training. And I would even add that there should be liability insurance for every gun owner, just like with a car. Well, that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay. Well, we got the last question here is kind of, I think Tremayne might be able to chime in here on this. Something a little bit more specific. What actions have you seen to be the most effective in your work in making some headway on these issues, that, you know, actions that people have taken and can take?
So I've been here a year. So my year, I kind of came here last year during election season, and then I got to see the full beast that is legislative session. And I guess ultimately, right, whether it was us organizing and phone banking for candidates in GOTV, and seeing how some of our candidates that we put really ourselves and others put true time, talent, and treasure into them, and some of those candidates winning by like a couple 100 votes that probably wouldn't have happened if we didn't put that time into them, or whether it was legislative session and something like restricting high capacity magazines that we were up in the air with until the very end because it's going through the legislature. All of that happened through organizing, right? And all that organizing was people. It was the people. So I would say, to me, that number one thing is we can't do what we do without our grassroots advocacy. And our grassroots is our supporters. It's the everyday Janes and Toms and Tremaynes and Jays of the world who we are constantly in contact with, or our partner organizations who also believe in gun responsibility and the safety of their communities. And so when we say, hey, it's legislative session, here's our priorities, this is what we're trying to do, they also get their people activated. That, to me, end all be all, is it's the people. We could not do anything without people, because that's when we send out emails, when we ask for actions, it's sending it to people to take that action, to communicate with their electeds, whether it's at the municipal, at the state, at the federal level. That is what it is. It's getting people involved, pulling people in if they haven't heard about us, and getting activated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. And that kind of goes in line with one of our taglines of the people, by the people, for the people. So, and with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Sarajean. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Patrick, Mike, Tremayne, and Jay, of course. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I think, I hope everybody feels a little bit more on the excited part now and not on the depressed side about it's time for us to do something. I'd like to talk about some of the things we can do before we go into the breakout rooms and talk with some of the speakers or some of the other Democrats Abroad leadership about what we can do. I'm going to quickly introduce 5 or 6 different things. One has 2 parts to it. Then in about 5 minutes, you'll be able to choose a breakout room. And I want to quickly spend about 1 minute on each of these. One is, at the federal level, some people are happy, some people are angry. The Senate recently passed that bill that was 2 bills that made it through the House that include things like enhanced background checks for people under 21, investments in mental health and suicide prevention. What we know is different ideas around red flag laws, which are actually in law called extreme risk protection orders, including a boyfriend loophole, that it's not just somebody you're married to that you can that against which you can make a claim about not allowing them to have a weapon. Still in brackets, because it's not exactly sure what this definition is, as a federally licensed firearm dealer, expansion of school security. The text is still being written. As of this morning's news, some of the key negotiators on the GOP side have stepped away from the talks. So it isn't over yet. Not only because it hasn't been specified, but because negotiations have broken down. So it's very important you call your senators. At the state level, besides Washington, which you can talk directly to Jay about in the breakout room, there are 3 other states that have 8 different initiatives: Iowa, Oregon, Nebraska. If anyone is from any of those states, we do have fact sheets, a fact sheet packet on that. And I would encourage you to actually not only write to your state representatives, but to also engage your people back home, your family, your friends. Maybe they don't really know that much about these different ballot initiatives coming up. So we have some fact sheets with information about them, links you can get more information. Also in our packet, whether it's writing to state legislators or federal legislators, your Senate, we have a little template for you to either write or call. It's great to talk about these things. It's not enough. We actually have to now take action. Without that, this talk just goes down as another Facebook Live event. Another thing you can do, and I know some people are hesitant about doing this, but this has a really big impact, especially if you're not like a market like Mike and I from New York. It's a little bit harder to get an op-ed or a column in the New York Times, but in your local paper, it's much easier. I can tell you, if you're from a smaller city, it's much easier. Write a small article, whether it's about the ballot initiative in your state or what's happening at the federal level, or what you think about what's going on. Share your views as someone from overseas. We have on our documents in our packet, we do have a link to this website where you can find your local hometown papers where they exist. Many don't exist anymore. And there's also tips for how to write a letter to the editor. Now we're going to go into breakout rooms in just a minute. So what we want people to do is not just to commiserate, not just to complain. The point is to be focused on action, which will have an impact. Educating others, writing letters, making phone calls, having actions in your local community are very important, or writing the letters. I would ask, if you're in a room, we'd love for someone to take a few notes. We'd like for you all to come up with specific things that you personally will do, not things other people should do. And we will have some, not necessarily facilitators, but some kinds of group leaders in the rooms. We will have about 20 minutes. We're going to come back at 20 before the hour. And we're going to have 5 rooms. I think for this number of people, we'll keep the, we won't have the 6th room today. So I'm going to set up the rooms in just a minute. Room 1 will be the federal level room. Contact your senator. Room 2, write or call your state government. We'll leave it up to you for people if you are from Nebraska, Iowa, or Oregon. If you're from Washington State, or if you want to find out more about what Tremayne is doing, go into room 3. Room 4, if you're from New York, or you want to find out more about what Mike is doing and how that might apply in your state, go to room 4, chat with Mike. And if you want to write a letter to your hometown paper, join me in room 5. I am opening 5 breakout rooms. And what I'm going to I want to put a little sign off to the people who are on Facebook Live, because we're going to end the Facebook Live in just a minute. If people are on Facebook, they can join us online, and I will be able to put them in a room. I'm opening the rooms: room 1, federal level; room 2, state level; room 3, talk to Tremayne about Washington State and what's going on there; room 4, talk to Mike about the bill he's proposing, what's going on there; room 5, if you want to write a letter to your hometown paper. So you are free to join any room. There's 5 rooms open. We come back at 20 to the hour. And I am sorry, I cannot see the chat, unfortunately. So if you're having a problem moving into the room, I can force you into a room from here. I can force you into a room. I see we have 17 people not in rooms yet. I will move you again randomly if you like. Okay, if people haven't moved in rooms, I'm going to move you randomly because we are evacuating the main room, except for a few of the rooms. Hi. Jay, you can move yourself. I'm moving everyone else. And I'm going to stop recording for a moment. And I'm putting the recording back on. Everyone will be coming in just a minute or so. We have about 30 seconds for everyone to come back in. In the meantime, I'm going to restart the Facebook Live. So that should take about 30 seconds for us to set up the Facebook Live and for everyone to come back in the room. So let's just give everyone a quick 30 seconds. Is it for everyone to come back in? Yes. Okay, we've got 2 rooms left for everyone to come back in. And I'll just prepare everyone who's here. What usually happens in the last section is we ask people to include their action steps in the chat, but also to do something like this. No, not share this. Sorry, let me stop that. Sharing the wrong thing. Sorry, gang. So thank you, everyone. A really interesting, different types of discussion in each of the rooms. I would like to ask everyone to reflect for 1 minute moving forward. Like for everyone to confirm one specific concrete thing you will do. And one of the things you see that mine usually says this is at the top is follow up with everyone to ensure you do what you say you're going to do. I'd like everyone to take a minute to confirm what that step is and commit to it either by putting it in the chat or writing it down and putting it on some paper and sharing that. And I'll give everybody a quick minute to either put it in the chat or put it on the board or put it up on your screen so we can take a photo. And Ted, I'm not sure if you can hear us or see us, but for some reason, it says you're the speaker right now. So we have a number of people who are going to call their state reps, call their local senators, write their members of Congress. And it stopped again. All right. So we have a number of people who said they're going to write or call, or can't see mine because I'm blurred. I've got too many things going on, but I'm going to be sending everyone who's joined us, everyone who has signed up, a packet of materials that we've put together about how to write, how to call. And another thing we like to do is, if you are willing to, if you can either hold up your action item or show us your beautiful face, we do like to get a group photo and then share some final comments about our actions, and a takeaway and an action item before we go. Right senators, right members of Congress, right local press. I hope he doesn't get shot the next time he visits. Well, it depends on what you write. It's not going to happen. Thank you. Let's, since there aren't that many people left, there's only 20 people. How about everybody give a quick 20-30 second your action item? I gave you mine, and we'll do this in a popcorn round. I'll go to Mike. I'll start with our speakers. Mike, your takeaway and or action item, please. I can't hear you, Mike. Can you all hear Mike? I can't hear Mike. Try again. Try again. Okay, you're on mute now.
He just sent a chat saying he's getting an error message that his mic is not working.
Okay.
I think if you don't mind, I think Mike has said before, and he's going to continue. He's going to work to bring forth that bill that he's sponsoring, to his state of origin bill, to that's proposing tracking where the guns are originating from. He's going to try to make sure those gets on the bills in the state in New York.
And Mike, if you could share that with us, because I would like to emphasize that although not everyone here is a Democrats Abroad member, only less than 7% of Americans overseas vote, and around 7.8%, excuse me, Americans overseas vote. And if even 20% more vote, we can really have an impact. So this could give a little bit of a push to some Americans overseas. Thank you. Jay, how about you? Go ahead.
I'm going to make sure I vote for people who take these issues seriously, of course, and reach out to officials that, to let them know that this is what's on the people's minds.
Thank you. Jay, choose the next person. We'll go really quick that way.
Okay, well, let's see. The next person in a row that I'm looking at is Gwen.
You are mute.
Yeah, okay. So I was in the letter to the editor group, and I vote in a conservative area, as did several of my fellow members. So we talked a little bit about the points that would be most likely to sell in a conservative area or be received by people that aren't already preaching to the choir. Eric shared about ResistBot. We talked about the point about safety and stressing safety. And for example, we want the same things as a car, things that can't every reasonable person get behind that. And lastly, we said that we want to clarify what is and is not actually included in proposed legislation in the letters that we write, because the other side is making it like the sky is falling when that's not actually what's happening. So, and I pick H. Nicholas.
Well, I joined late and haven't formulated any thoughts other than what I just wrote someone here. The Second Amendment referred to what the Pilgrims were shooting with, what people used to go out and shoot turkeys with. Bullets were not invented; they were not in use until 1846. So we have a fundamental excuse for the right to have arms, and there are groups out there that do everything they can to allow people to just have guns when they want to have guns. So I think we need to have what do you call it, a moment where we will come together and realize, having a gun. You look what happened in New Zealand after the shooting at the mosque. It took 2 weeks and they outlawed assault weapons. 2 weeks. I'm not much for talking, so I'm just going to leave it at that by saying, we can never give up. This is a battle for human dignity. And I mean, I've been shot at. I have family members who've been shot at and a couple killed. And it's just like, when I was growing up, the police were police. They were men and women. They knew how to handle people. They didn't have to shoot. And people were afraid of the police. When I was in elementary school, junior high school, a bad kid had a knife, a jackknife, a jackknife. You had to unfold it. So we've got a state of mind that, I'll leave it with this. Hollywood has legitimized the use of guns. I worked in Hollywood for a number of years and I left it because of things that were going on. But basically, Hollywood is glamorized. You see people getting shot. It ain't nothing. And we have to make it something. And, Hollywood they are to blame. They bear part of the blame. Anyway, I'm going to stop my mic.
Do you want to choose the next person? Thank you.
Oh, you ask it. I don't know if she'd appreciate it, but someone that I do. Where's Gordon or
Gordon's
Cheryl?
there.
I'm
Or
here,
Cheryl?
Cheryl.
They're two people I've known for a while.
Hi, everyone. I've known Huntley for a long time. The reason I came to this is because I'm a teacher. And I remember the Texas shooting that day. So many of my teacher friends in Yokohama, we were really sad that day. Very, very sad, because we're teachers. And we really felt our heart went out to all of those teachers and students that got killed. So that's why I'm here. And I just wanted to say very briefly, I got my ballot. I'm going to fill it out and send it on Monday because I am rejuvenated. And I'm going to try to find out these people. I don't know who all of these legislators are in Virginia, but I'm going to try to find out who they are. Maybe I can reach out to them because I don't know them. But this has kind of energized me to try and do something just on a very small level, but at least find out who these people are that I'll be voting for. That's all. I'd like to choose, is Gordon there? No? Who else is left?
You're muted, Gordon. Yeah.
I'm here. What am I supposed to say? What should I say?
So we're asking what kind of actions out of the meeting today? What would you like to do as a result of meeting with us today?
What could I do? Let me see. Sir, I work in Odaiba in Tokyo, and then I'm doing a Japanese security guard. And anyways, at the guns, you're not supposed to have guns, right? So I don't know. What should I do? I'm not so sure what to say.
Do you vote in the United States?
I haven't voted. I don't know what. I've been here so long. I'm so confused. I haven't done anything, how to get the ballot.
Okay, Dave will reach out to you after this event. We will definitely make sure you know how to vote, okay?
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Make sure we get you, make sure we have the right email address.
I feel that sometimes the Californians think that they're like, well, it doesn't matter. Well, I'm from North Dakota, and I too think it's like it doesn't matter. But I did vote in my primaries, and just to see what issues are on the ballot, right?
Yeah.
Matt, what are you gonna do, Matt? Matt, what are you gonna do?
Well, so just recently, my godmother decided to become very active and call her legislator every day until something's done because of this last shooting. And so I reached out to her and posted on Facebook, thank you, Karen, so much. I appreciate that. Some more people need to do things like this. And so maybe working together, we can maybe submit something to the local paper. But like I said, getting shot, you think it's a joke, but definitely, it would definitely make a lot of people angry. But like you said, it depends on what you're right about. And I feel if you focus on safety, probably no one can object to that too much.
Gun
And
violence
moving
prevention
on,
is very safe. Gun
yeah.
violence prevention, safety matters.
maybe, Dave.
Yeah, okay. I said I was gonna write to my senators or at least contact them. But I think following what Cheryl said, I should look at my local state reps who I've not paid any attention to before and follow up with them as well. I think I will do that, yeah. And let's see, who have we not had yet? Patrick.
Well, I've probably said enough, but I would just say we need to work and organize and ban weapons of war, keep guns away from kids, stop the flow of guns.
Patrick, what are you going to do yourself?
Well, I
can't do
write
all
to
those
my
things.
legislatures,
Yes.
both on the local and the state reps, state senate, my House rep in Washington, Jayapal, who does an excellent job, and the senators, and I trash Ted Cruz on Twitter all the time. But anyway, those are the things I do.
All right, thank you. Can I just say who is left? We haven't heard from Tremayne, Alexi, Regina, Shelley, and Rachel's mic isn't working. So how about we go just in that order because you guys are in a line there. Tremayne.
It was me. At first, it's such a small world. Shout out to all the fellow Virginians that are apparently in the room. Love it. I will continue to keep recruiting advocates every day, every hour. And then I guess whoever was next in that lineup, it was called.
Alexi, Regina, Shelley.
Thank you everyone for today. Really informational and inspirational. I appreciate being a part of it. And if it seems feasible to truly ban assault rifles, weapons of war, AR-15s, AK-47s, if that really seems feasible to do, ban those weapons, then I'm willing to put some time into producing documents, statistics, research that will support that cause. Absolutely. And I'm pretty good at research. In addition, the next time I return to the States, those mean streets of America, which is going to be this summer, I'm willing to volunteer some time with the local violence interrupters, groups that work in the city where I'm from, and they do some fantastic work with some of the more turf conflict type stuff that's going down there. So violence interrupters, I have some friends that are involved with that, and I'm willing to volunteer my time with that. So thank you again for the nice morning, and please move the work forward.
Alexi, when you volunteer here, there's follow-up, so we got to be careful there, man. Thank you. Regina, and then Shelley, please.
Hi, I'm not going to show my video because it's late here and I don't have any lighting, but I'm going to support Mike because I'm from New York, so I'd like to support his transparency legislation, and but also I've been following Everytown. I don't know if people are familiar with Everytown, and it's just so freaking heartbreaking. So I plan to do more with that. So I'm
Thank you,
sorry.
Shelley.
Shelley, sorry.
Well, number one, I'm going to support Mike, even though I'm not in New York. I'm going to see what I can do on the side from Virginia. So hello to the fellow Virginians also. And I'm after the local level. I think more attention needs to be at your local city councilors, commissions, and things like that, and find out where their stance is at and put that pressure on them. And if they're not where they're supposed to do and they're doing action, then they need to make sure, we need to make sure they're not getting re-voted in.
Here, here. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Tremayne. Yeah, there's a lot of people from Virginia here. How do we know? You know, each one of these events are so inspirational, just thinking about what we can do at the different levels. I wanted to just wrap up with a few things. And one is, you make me realize how important, you know, the work we do. It's not just in voting and not just in educating people about issues, but how moving people to take action. I can't believe I didn't think about this, but you know, the former chair of Democrats Abroad Japan is running for state legislature in New York. We have got to get him on Mike's back. No, on Mike's whatever carpet ride in to make this happen. Dave was saying this to a few people, you know, in Arizona, in Georgia, we know that Democrats abroad voters made a difference at the state and local level. In the states where overseas voters can vote, our votes do make a difference because, for example, somebody want to say something? Sorry. No? Oh, okay.
Sorry, that was me, maybe. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No worries. I didn't want to interrupt you. But there are people back home that we can also get involved in this. Americans overseas, we need to get more people overseas voting, but also we can serve as a resource for our family and friends back home who may feel, whether it's numb to the violence, it's become normalized for them. It isn't normalized for us in Japan. It isn't normalized for people in Australia, in New Zealand, where in Canada, that's getting tougher. So we can be a big help. We can lead, we can help push this movement forward. And I think the key thing is that we don't just learn about it, we actually do something. So that's kind of our role. Democrats Abroad Japan will be following up with everyone. We will put the material, we will send the materials to everyone who RSVP'd, even all the Europeans who didn't come, realizing that it was 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, but we will push them. And oh yes, my cousin who's a city council member in Virginia state, I'm going to push him too. Okay, yeah, we've got to push those people and say, hey, did you know this is going on? This matters to us. We did have an assault weapons ban in the past. We can do that again. That's up to us to make it happen. Voting is important, but being heard throughout the year. Anybody here who hasn't voted like Gordon, we will be sending you those links, votefromabroad.org. It's very important to vote when you can, but it's very important to stay in touch. If you're not a member of Democrats Abroad member, sorry, you have to live in Japan to be Democrats Abroad Japan member. It's free. We send you information on elections and what's going on. Oh, Thomas Treves is coming back. But I want to thank everyone for coming. We're just 1 minute after the hour. I hope you feel like you're ready to go and change the world now, because I know we can make changes. I'd like to formally end the recording, and if people want to stick around and chat, I'm welcome to chat with people. And thank you very much to each and every one of you for being here today.